Hey, Bon.
Well, hello, Jen, and hello, everyone. I am Bonnie Low-Kramen, and I want to welcome you to a very special segment of Heads Together. It is a special time, a special day, and I have a special guest. The last few days have been quite something. We had the publishing of the article that I co-wrote with Jeremy Spake called How HR is Really Deciding How Much to Pay You. The article came out of a curiosity that I've had for years to answer that very question. And I had struggled to find someone who could actually give me a cogent answer. So I made it my business to find out. And today's conversation is with Jeremy. I'm so grateful he can be here with me and with all of you. So welcome to all of you who are signing on to the call. I know we have you coming in from all over the world. Tell us what city you're in. And thanks for the feedback, Kare, about how great you think the article is. It's gotten really good feedback. Lucy Brazier is the publisher, of course, Executive Secretary Magazine, terrific magazine for the assistant profession. So Jen, welcome. You're coming to us today from
my home office in Edison, New Jersey, where it finally feels like fall, not winter, not summer.
Yeah. Well, we welcome you. For those of you who haven't met Jen or been on this call, I know we have a new time today. Jen and I have been working together, for 7 years. I used to live in Edison, New Jersey. And when we moved to Florida 4 years ago, Bob Sanders and me, and Bob's listening on the call. So thanks, Robert, for being here. Jen and I continued our partnership remotely. So we work together on Zoom every week. So Jen, you've had an interesting career. And I know we were talking earlier about your dealings with HR. Tell us, give us an example of what your experience was with an HR department.
Frightening, fear of HR, and that
Pretty
they
common.
my back to be able to help me negotiate with my salary.
Yeah, like you said that there was no negotiation.
There was no negotiation, no.
You were just told what you're going to do.
This is it. I was the admin for 50 sales reps in the New York tri-state area. I was doing all the proposals, their finances, everything.
Yeah. In 2018, I spoke at a conference in Fort Worth, Texas called HR Southwest. And they asked me to come down to speak about workplace bullying, which I did. And at that conference, I met an HR professional who was really fascinated about the world of assistants. And so I want to just share with all of you on the call, because some of you have heard this before, but and she's actually the one who told me about Jeremy. And Jeremy told me today that he happened to have been at that very same conference, although we didn't meet at that conference. Christina was her name, this HR person. And we're sitting there talking about the world of assistants. And she used to be an assistant, but now she's in HR. And she said, so tell me about the assistant world. And I said, well, do you really want to know? And she said, yeah, I really want to know. I said, well, all right, here goes. The assistants of the world do not really want to deal with HR. They will do pretty much anything to not deal with HR. They will go around you. They will go over you. They will go through you. They really don't want to deal with you. And you asked me for the truth. The truth is that many assistants feel that HR are neither human nor are they resources. And of course, that's, a harsh thing to say, but it speaks to the contentious nature of the two roles. And I went on to say that HR assistants do not feel that HR in general is for them. is for them, is an advocate for them, that they view HR as the representative of the company and really protecting the company, not the staffer, right?
Yeah.
Jen, is that accurate?
I would say so.
So I'm bracing myself for Christina's reaction. And she pauses, she's silent. And she said, well, I have a response for the assistants. I said, oh, really? Okay, bring it. Tell me what it is. I was honest with you. You tell them, tell me what you think. And she said, you tell the assistants of the world that they're absolutely right, that HR is not for them. And that, frankly, the last thing on our list often are EA job descriptions and titles and money. And then, of course, we continued being in touch, and she led me to Jeremy because she clearly knew my passion about this subject and wanting so much to end the wage gap and to support assistants to make the money that you deserve. Fair money, not greedy money, but fair money. And so when Jeremy and I first spoke, my goodness, he blew my mind with a couple of conversations that he was so generous to share his time with me. So I'm about to introduce him, but first I want to just welcome everyone on the call. You're pouring in from California and Pennsylvania and Oklahoma and Jersey girls. Yay, Jersey girl. Yay. Welcome, welcome. This, I can tell you that in the 14 countries and the 38 states that I've been in, the subject of money is one of the most burning issues out there. And that it's your livelihood we're talking about. This is the difference between being underpaid and being paid fairly can be life-changing for people. It could mean the difference of moving to a new place or putting your kid in a new school or putting better food on the table. I mean, we're talking human issues here. And that's what Jeremy and I were getting to in this article. So Jeremy is out of Seattle, Washington, and he works at a company called Cornerstone. And he is one of the principal consultants there. He is a compensation expert. When Christina connected us, she told me that he delivered not one, but 2 mega sessions at the big HR conference in Las Vegas, which I did not attend. But he is looked to for up to the minute information about what is going on in compensation in the United States. And I'm so grateful to have him here and to have written this article with him. One last story before I bring him on. As we were talking, and I realized how much this man knew, and he, everything he was sharing was resonating about the assistant world. I said, is there an article about this? Have you ever written about this? And he said, no, I haven't. And I held my breath when I said, would you write it with me? And he said, yes, I will. I'm like, can we write an article that will be as honest as we can possibly be about all of this? And he said, yes. I said, you're not frightened by that? And he said, nope. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jen, can we please bring on Jeremy Spake?
Well, hello, good afternoon, Bonnie. And I can't really recover from that gracious introduction, but if I could, I would just say all the back glowing things about you and how wonderful it's been to work with you and how great it is to know you. So thank you for that introduction. And I hope I live up to your standards.
Well, I know you will. There's absolutely no doubt. I asked Jeremy to come on today, and we're giving ourselves an hour. Jen's going to be organizing things from behind the scenes. So thanks, Jen, for that. I asked Jeremy to come on and kind of bring us up to speed. And, maybe if you want to comment on the article at all about, what's happened to you from your side of the country with me in Florida, and to give us some updates on what is happening in our world and our workplace that is being impacted by the pandemic, help our audience figure out how they now navigate with HR. And of course, we're going to talk about pay equity and pay transparency. And Jen, I see lots of comments coming in. So we're going to allow Jeremy to speak for a bit, and then we will address as many of these questions and comments as we possibly can. Jeremy, take it away.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. And first off, let me just say, I've been working in the area of compensation and performance management since 2004. And the way I kind of became someone to work in the compensation world was really kind of by accident. I don't think anyone goes to school or thinks about in high school, I want to be a comp guy in an HR department in a corporation, in the future. That's not kind of a career path that I even knew existed in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I was in graduate school, and I'd been taking a lot of statistics classes that were required as part of my graduate degree. And on a listserv for the grad students at the time, what were lots of postings about, different kinds of part-time jobs or projects you could do to kind of test your quantitative skills. One of them happened to be at a compensation survey firm, and I was living in Atlanta at the time. So I applied and got this job, and I had never even heard of a compensation survey. I didn't know that existed, or that there were people out there who made their profession and careers in really studying compensation data and then turning that data into a strategy for a company. I had no idea this existed, but I started working there part-time as a graduate student, and I found out that I really, really enjoyed it because I like the aspect of, using data to tell a story and using data to kind of make a point. And particularly when I started working at that compensation survey firm, over about 6 years I was there, I became a kind of a client-facing consultant and really started to see how people use compensation data to then thereby pay people, decide what kind of offers they're going to be making, set their salary structures, determine what a merit increase might look like, determine what the level should be in an organization, determine what a bonus payout should look like. These surveys really carry a lot of weight. And these surveys really drive a lot of what companies do. And I was unaware that this even existed, right? So the survey firm that I was working at was primarily targeted for tech and life sciences companies. And then over my career, I went into working in compensation as my actual, in a functional capacity in several corporate environments and consulting environments. So I'll just kind of say I kind of fell into doing compensation. But as I've grown over my career in the last almost 17 years, I've noticed there are inextricable links between compensation and performance. For example, your performance rating usually dictates what your merit increase will be, what your bonus payout will be. And so it's interesting when you think about kind of these ideas of wage disparity, because when you think about the way that the workforce is kind of made up, about 50% of the US population in a macro level is man, and about 50% is female. So we're about 50-50 in terms of our overarching population. The workforce in the United States is also about 50-50 male-female. But when you look at who is a manager and who makes decisions about who gets promoted, who makes decisions about who's going to have the higher rating for their performance review, that then, of course, dictates what their payout may be for a bonus or any kind of merit increase. Overwhelmingly, 80% of managers in the US, according to Gallup, their survey they had about 2 years ago, are men. So there's a huge disparity here. And overwhelmingly, data tells us that men reward other men more than they reward women. So if you've got more men in managerial roles, more men making these decisions, then overwhelmingly you're going to have kind of this skew. So this became interesting to me just kind of as I was growing through my career, and I really started to pay attention to pay equity and really thinking about, how does that gender gap disparity translate into people? Because the article that we wrote, Bonnie, I told you, I think I shared it with several people in my team. And one of the comments I got back that I really thought was pretty astute, that it kind of hadn't occurred to me, was that they liked the article that you and I put out because it was talking about people making decisions about people rather than organizations as this kind of big behemoth. We often have these kinds of big organizational cultural values that organizations will put out. But then when you think about how that translates into people managing other people, people deciding things about other people, no matter what great policies or culture you may think you have in place, at the end of the day, people making decisions, there's a lot of areas for unconscious bias to show up, a lot of areas for disparity that we see existing in all companies. So I really became interested in this and started paying attention to what are companies doing to correct this. So things like having a pay equity task force. And by the way, I really love the example of Mark Benioff. He is the Salesforce CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And his HR, and there's a great 60 Minutes piece. I encourage everyone to Google and check it out. But basically the CHRO comes to him and says, we really need to take a look at pay equity here at Salesforce and make sure that we are paying men and women the same. And Mark Benioff, the CEO, says, oh, you don't need to worry about doing that. We're the best place to work. And we've gotten the Fortune Magazine Best Place to Work Award, #1 best place to work in the country for 5 years in a row. I have personally, as the CEO, made promoting and retaining women a priority for me. So he goes, you don't even need to look under the hood. You don't need to do that. We don't play shenanigans, is his words, with people's pay here at Salesforce. But the CHRO, she pushed back on him and said, no, we really should take a look. And they did. It turns out they had about a $20 million gap in terms of the way they were paying men and women. So the lesson here is that even in organizations that have all the right kind of cultural levers pulled and are thinking that they're doing the right things, when you have the right policies and procedures in place and the right kind of checks and balances, you're still going to have things fall through the crack because it's still people making decisions about people. Mm-hmm. So even in kind of these great cultural environments that some corporations have, you're still going to have pay equity problems. So having this top of mind that people think about and incorporate into an annual cycle, I think is a critical thing to do so that, pay equity doesn't fall through the cracks for people and that it is top of mind for decision makers and that that's a part of manager training.
Agreed. And I love the part of the 60 Minutes piece where he said, all right, let's do the survey. Let's figure out if there is a disparity. And I remember she said to him, now listen, Mark, if we do this, if I get this data, then, and you see what I'm predicting, which is going to be a huge gap between men and women, we have to do something about it then.
Right. And so that is,
yeah. And so he put millions of dollars that year. It was $3 million. And as I recall, and it's on YouTube, the 60 Minutes piece. I was screaming when I was watching this. It was because Mark Benioff's actions as CEO of Salesforce has had impact on other CEOs and other professionals who are seeing him as a role model and saying, you know what, we really ought to pay attention. And I know in our article, you've so correctly started pointing to, the Me Too and Time's Up and diversity and inclusion pieces of this.
Right. Yeah. And so if you think about the diversity and inclusion pieces of this, so let me just share with everyone, if you're not familiar with Equal Pay Day, it's a symbolic day that happens every year in America. This year, it was March 31st, 2020. But last year in 2019, I believe it was April 5th or 6th. I'm not exactly sure, but you see it's moved up. It's creeped up a little bit. So it's moved up from April 5th or 6th to March 31st. So Equal Pay Day is this symbolic day that represents how far into the year a woman needs to work to make the same amount as her male counterpart. So let's just use simple math for the sake. So if Bonnie, you and I have the same job and our salary is $100,000, let's just say for simplicity's sake, and we start on January 1st. Well, by December 31st, I've made my $100,000. But the macro level gender disparity wage gap data tells us that women in the United States have to work until March 31st to make the same salary.
Right.
Now, when you add on further intersections of race, it gets even worse. So Asian American women, looking at my stats over here, they have to work until March 5th. So a little bit better than the national average. And right. My tongue is in cheek when I say better, right? African American women have to work all the way till August 22nd, Native American women to September 23rd, and Latin American women all the way to November 20th, almost a full second year. So the intersections of race added on to the disparity between gender shows us that there are huge disparities in the way that women are being paid in this country.
And so really, time out a second.
Yeah.
That cannot be okay with anybody listening right now. That cannot be okay that it takes women almost a full other year to make what men did the full year before. And so if we do nothing, it's going to take about 200 years to get to equity. It's going to take a super long time, and I don't have that kind of time. And I know you don't either, Jeremy. And I was so grateful when Jeremy and I were writing this article. He cares about women, making the right money as much as I do. So it's this is a people issue. This is not a female versus male issue. This has impact over whole families. So that's why we're so adamant about having these out in the open conversations about compensation and pay equity and pay transparency, as opposed to secrecy and forbidden and taboo and like, oh gosh, you can't talk about money. No. Like, yeah, please continue.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, just, continuing what you were just saying, I've worked as a comp practitioner in a department at a corporation before, where the comp team, we were kind of seen as kind of like the comp police almost, right? So people had to come to us to get permission for pretty much everything. And I think there are organizations that still work in that way. I think that's an antiquated way to work. And we cannot imagine that people don't talk up to each other about pay. They obviously do. And so these kinds of ideas that, no one's going to talk around the water cooler, for lack of a better phrase, that people don't talk about pay, that's just frankly absurd. And by the way, now there is so much crowdsourced data out there around compensation that employees have at their fingertips. Everyone on the call, you've probably heard of salary.com in the past, and they're still around. But there are lots of new sites that have popped up like that. For example, Pay Scale, Pay Factors, and now even places like Glassdoor and LinkedIn will have salary information tied to job postings.
Right.
So where's this information coming from? Where is LinkedIn getting this salary data that they're putting in a job description? Well, sometimes it comes from the company themselves if they're promoting the role, but sometimes, and more often than not, it's come from crowdsourced compensation sites, meaning I'm going to go out today and I'm going to say, okay, I'm an accountant with 5 years of experience, as an example. I live in Dallas, Texas. I have an MBA. And so I'm going to type in all these credentials, right? I have 7 years of experience, whatever it looks like. And these algorithms spit back at you the estimated range for a salary in that role with that level of education, level of experience in your particular geography. And sometimes it even gets into, really nuanced things like I'm going to work in the tech industry versus the hospitality industry. So there are lots of different data cuts people can use. So I bring this up to say employees now have a lot of data at their fingertips, and we're all used to crowdsourcing. I mean, when I'm watching something on Netflix and it pops up, you might be interested in this, I'm probably going to check it out because I'm probably going to be interested in it. If I'm in a new city, I'm going to look at Yelp for recommendations of places to eat. And we all are kind of used to looking at reading reviews and checking out what other people say. So employees now, the generation below me, are definitely used to crowdsourcing everything. And if they have all these different new sites emerging all the time with ever evolving and increasingly sophisticated algorithms. And one of them, by the way, is located not too far from me here in Seattle. And I've met the guys, and I got to tell you, these crowdsourced comp sites are great, and they're getting better. And I'm just bringing this up to tell everyone that now we all have access to more compensation data. So as a former comp police person, that I might not share market data internally with the organization because we were told not to. Now employees have a lot more ammunition at their fingertips. Now employees can go to their manager, they can go to their HR department, and they can say, hey, LinkedIn and Glassdoor and PayScale and all these other sites are telling me my salary should be this, and it's different here. So what's the gap, and why is it there? And this is sparking a lot of interesting conversations, especially with clients that I'm helping to consult around. Well, what do we say when we're presented with this type of information? How do we and really the answer comes down to our managers typically are not adept at having conversations around compensation just because they've never really had to. There's always been a number kind of floating out there that comes from HR or comp or wherever, and the managers are given this number and that's what they go with. Yeah. But now with all these new avenues where employees can find other forms of data, managers and HR departments are being confronted with that and having to figure out, are we truly paying equitably? Maybe we have to be more transparent about the pay decisions that we make. And maybe we need to be more transparent internally about how we're deciding, who gets what. So these conversations, I think, are, as you mentioned, Bonnie, I think they've been going on a long time, but it seems now is a fulcrum point. It seems like so much of it is happening in the last few years, like you said, as a result of Me Too and Time's Up. I think companies really started to take a look at their own pay practices and diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. But particularly this summer, it's gotten even more pronounced. And I saw a stat from SHRM, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that said they've seen an increase in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion postings just since June, and to the amount of about 3,000%. So companies are paying attention to all types of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and paying attention to what's the best way to embed these types of ideals in all of our talent management processes, including pay.
I think, so now we're talking about that there's been just a lot of change in the workplace. The pandemic certainly is one of those things. But Jeremy, prior to the pandemic, you were telling me that at the big SHRM conference that front of mind was this whole notion of pay equity and pay transparency. So the assistants of the world, okay, so we're hearing that there's a change. It's hard to react in a second. We didn't get here in a moment. So it's going to take a while to kind of rev up to this new way. Oh, is it really okay to go to HR and ask for a pay evaluation? And the answer is yes. We know that the demographic is that assistants of the world are 95 to 98% female. And a lot of people commented on your comment in the article, Jeremy, that we need better PR. And indeed we do. But what is true is that women in general are not trained to negotiate. And so this whole issue of money is filled with, weighted down with a lot of feelings and a lot of emotion. And we're caught up with, our own feelings of self-worth regarding salaries. Here's a point I must make. And in my speaking with HR folks and leaders, what's clear, and what Mark Benioff of Salesforce knows, which Bianca made a comment that it's going to take high-level men in power helping to make this change. You bet that that's true. But Mark Benioff is an example of that high-powered person. And he's not doing it out of only the kindness of his own heart. He's doing it because it's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, because everyone on this call can relate to the idea that if you are paid fairly, then you don't have to be preoccupied with the worry that you're not going to be able to put food on the table this week. You can then focus on productivity, effectiveness, morale increases, because if you feel like you're being paid fairly, that automatically means you feel respected and valued and appreciated in the role. That equals money to a company. If we know that to have a high attrition rate, for there to be a revolving door of people, and so retention is low, we know on this call that costs companies a lot of money to replace people. And many assistants I talk to are leaving in search of better money. But I can tell you that leaders are motivated to find ways to keep you. Your leverage is that they don't want to lose you. They don't want you to walk out the door because there's enough chaos going on in the workplace right now. They're looking to hold on to their high producers, the assistants of the world who are the backbones of the company. And so there is an inclination to find a way to work with you, to help you stay. So this is not about being greedy and oh my gosh, our leaders are going to be so upset with Jeremy and Bonnie because they're telling you to advocate for what's fair. That translates, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you pay people fairly, it translates into higher retention and higher productivity and higher loyalty. What do you think about that?
I mean, music to my ears. You're so completely right. And I was just trying to pull up some statistics I have that are just really around exactly what you were just saying. So there's a group called the Center for Talent and Innovation. They produced a study in 2017 that says that people in an organization who perceive that they are being treated unfairly, and pay was one of the factors they looked at, are 3 times more likely to be disengaged at work,
Mm-hmm.
3 times more likely to leave within a year, 5 times more likely to feel that they're alienated at work, 4 times less likely to follow through on some project just because they feel like, there's what's the point?
Right.
2.5 times more likely to withhold ideas because they don't feel like their voice matters. And over 5 times more likely to damage the organization's brand on social media in some way. And we all know people are looking at blind and LinkedIn and Glassdoor for company reviews. And so this study found also, Bonnie, to talk about the idea of how much it costs to replace people. So Gallup estimates that it costs anywhere between 1.5 to 2 times a person's base salary to bring in someone new and get them up to speed. So if you take a look at that, and Gallup, by the way, I can't recommend them enough. They have been studying workplace disparity between the genders since the 50s. So they've got the most data. And so I'll probably refer to them quite a lot, but they've got the most data on pay disparities and wage gaps and kind of the delineation of who's a manager and who's not, and who's engaged and who's not, because they've been collecting employee surveys for, since 1955. So they have found, and they've gotten increasingly more sophisticated with the types of questions they ask and the data they collect. But as of 2017, they estimate if you've got employees in your organization who are leaving because they don't feel engaged due to there's some perception of bias and pay being a big factor of that, it costs anywhere between 450 to 550 billion with a B dollars to replace that talent every year in the American workforce. So if you have to make an argument with your leadership team that this is something people should be looking at, there are real world tangible kinds of stats that we could absolutely provide that will show that this is a real bottom line kind of negative impact.
This is
to
business.
Companies. This is business.
Smart business to pay people fairly. And by the way, one of the questions in the chat is this being recorded? The answer is yes. It's going straight to YouTube, and you'll be able to share this with others. So thank you for asking that question. Yeah, this is major, that it costs companies a lot of money. And, it's a related issue where, oftentimes assistants will talk about workplace bullying and how leadership is tolerating the bullying because the bully happens to be a rainmaker and brings in a lot of money. Well, my question is, who's paying attention to the revolving door of people that are running out the door in the other departments that's costing probably more money than the rainmaker is bringing in? What we feel is that it is time. This pandemic has really revealed some of the darker problems of our workplace. And wouldn't it be great if this extreme situation is the perfect time to solve them, to address them? What else you got, Jeremy?
Oh, I was just going to say, I absolutely think this is a great time to do that because, in my work, so I work for a software company, and we have solutions that help clients, think about performance management, do pay equity analysis, things like this. So really, we've seen, I think, since the pandemic began, kind of 2 camps in terms of organizations that we deal with. Some of them, are doing great. For example, Amazon, they're booming. Okay. Some of them, however, are, and by the way, a lot of organizations, most organizations, I would say, are having to tighten their purse strings or really think about furloughs or even letting people go. That's just the reality of any kind of economic downturn. So the interesting thing that people can do in an economic downturn, however, is take the chance to really redefine your role. And by the way, many people's roles are changing and expanding and ever evolving, especially now, because we're having to do a lot of things maybe we weren't expected to, or do things in new ways, or reskill ourselves in some ways, or just, step in to help in areas that maybe we're not used to doing that. So people's roles are changing and evolving. But what I think is an important thing to do is think about what's the crux of your responsibility in your job description. Get your job descriptions. And I saw a comment a moment ago about a job description review. And I got to tell you, I think that's a really critical thing to do, because going back to the survey idea where companies get the data about how much jobs should be worth on the market, they're looking through a big library of job descriptions in these company surveys. So if I'm looking at this library of surveys, jobs, and I'm trying to figure out which survey job I'm going to use to figure out how much to pay my people, If I internally don't have a good job description to compare it against, I'm not going to get good data. And the truth of the matter is, while it really is HR's responsibility to maintain and update and make sure the job descriptions are current, these are things that fall through the cracks. And these are things that fall through the cracks all the time.
Yep.
So the harsh reality is sometimes we have to advocate for ourselves. And sometimes we have to say, I would like a job description review because what I've been tied to or the level I've been tied to and however you're determining how much I'm being paid, I don't think is correct or adequate. And so I think that there is a really great appetite to do all of this, and especially in the last few years, due to all of the kind of societal changes that we're seeing. Companies are paying attention. And so now is the time, I think, to strike.
So Jeremy, before we went on the air, you were talking about if two people were going up for the same job and about the asking about salary. Could you tell that story about, the new laws, the new legislation that's out there?
Yeah, sure thing. So you may have heard of this already, and I think it's about 17 states now. I think there have been more that have been added since in the last month or so. But effectively, there's been a trend in pay transparency legislation that began, I would say, 2015.
Right.
So this is a new trend. It's not in terms of the legislation, at least, and I don't see it going away. The intent of the legislation is to mitigate pay disparities between men and women. And so the legislation says if you're an organization hiring a candidate, you can no longer ask that candidate what their previous salary is. So let's give a little kind of hypothesis scenario. Let's say I'm a manager and I've got an opening on my team. And I know because the internal comp department here at Cornerstone has told me the role is worth $100,000 on the market. Just use that number to be easy. And so I've got a budget of $100,000. I know the market data tells me 100. I've got a budget of 100. I'm ready to hire somebody. Well, I've got two candidates in front of me, and I really like them both. For all intents and purposes, they're equal talent, and I would be happy with either of them. One is a man, one is a woman. So I ask them, all right, and by the way, I'm not telling them that I'm hiring for a $100,000 job. I'm just going to ask them what their previous salary was. So let's say the woman tells me her previous salary was $80,000, and the man tells me his previous salary was $90,000. Well, I know the market data tells me the job is worth 100, so they're both being paid below market for whatever reason. Well, if I've got $100,000 in my hands and I've got two people in front of me that are basically, the same for all intents and purposes, but one's cheaper, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to hire the cheaper talent, right? So I may think I've done a good job as a manager. I've got a great talent in here who's paid less than I really had the budget for. So it's a win for me. It's a win for the company. But what have I done? What I have done is have perpetuated a pay gap. So the woman and the man, they were both already being paid below. But now what I'm going to do is just keep that woman at her lower rate, and I'm going to give her maybe a bump. I'm going to give when I make her an offer, I'm going to say maybe I'm going to give you a salary of $85,000. So I'm giving you a $5,000 increase in your salary, and probably she's going to be grateful for that, right? Because she's getting an increase in a new job. Well, behind the scenes, what has happened is I know the role is worth more than that. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm saving money, and so I've perpetuated this pay gap. So this new legislation is meant to make it so that I can't do that. So I can't ask you your previous salary legally. So now I've got really this $100,000 bucket of money that I'm going to use for this role. I've got two candidates in front of me, and now I've just got to make the decision based on other factors that do not include pay. So that's the goal of the legislation. Is that legislation working? And I see your smile, Bounty, because I think we both know the answer that it is not. So
well,
here's
assistants report back that might be the legislation, but they still get asked that question in a way from recruiters or HR departments. And so what do we do about that?
And so the way people ask it, I've heard, and by the way, I've been the person who's asked this before. What are your salary expectations? That's how you get around that. I don't ask you your previous salary. I'm going to ask you your salary expectations, and maybe you're going to give me a range, and I'll get a pulse of where you're going to sit.
Right.
So, and I'll be honest with you. So my current role, I've been here 5 years, and they asked me the same question. What is your expectations? And I said, I know exactly what this job is worth. You impress me. And so, by the way, I mean, I think that we all have to kind of take on that attitude. I know what I'm worth on the market. And by the way, we all have access to a lot of crowdsourced compensation data now. So go out and arm yourself with that data and say, I know what this role is worth on the market. I've done my homework. It's now your time to impress me. Make me an offer that I can't refuse. And I know that sounds a little pompous and maybe a little arrogant, but quite frankly, the only way we're going to kind of make sure that everyone is kind of paid in an equitable way is to push back.
Yeah. And I would say that I love that you said that. I think it's easier for a man to say that than a woman. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, you said this earlier that, you know, and I think we both have talked about this, and that typically, I know this is a huge generalization, but I think typically that, you know, men are more socialized to negotiate.
Yep.
And so I think that that's definitely the case. And in an ideal world, you've got a great comp department with people who are doing the right things, but we all know that's not always the case.
Well, let me ask you, as a guy, were you ever nervous about asking for more money?
Yeah, I have been in the past.
Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for owning that. But,
absolutely. I've been very nervous about that.
One last scenario before we open it up. My gosh, the comments and the questions. And Jen, I understand that Jen had a little connectivity issue. Jen, are you cool?
I'm back.
You're back. Very cool. All right. So Jen, I'm going to say one more thing and then we'll take comments and questions. So I was having a conversation with an HR director, and Jeremy, I'd love your feedback on this because I'm pretty sure I haven't mentioned this to you. The scenario exists in the workplace where you have a department that has, for example, 5 assistants at varying numbers of years of experience and at different salary levels. And in the article, you shared that many HR departments are paying assistants the minimum they'll say yes to.
Yes.
Okay. So then the 5th assistant leaves and needs to be replaced. So candidates come in to interview for the role in 2020, and the role is worth, just for argument's sake, $100,000. And they hire new assistant for $100,000. Well, the other assistants are not making $100,000, and they have much more seniority than newest assistant being paid $100,000. So I said to this HR professional who is ethical and is by the book, and I said, what is the right thing to do? What is the correct thing what is the ethical, what's the by the book thing to do in that situation? And she said, the thing to do is to bring in the new assistant for $100,000, if that's what you need to pay her or him, and bump up the other 4 assistants incrementally so that they are above the new assistant, so that they should be by seniority. And she said that doesn't happen in a lot of companies. Jeremy, I wonder, is that your understanding of how to handle that situation?
So first and foremost, I'll say the scenario that you've just described happens in every job function. So we've got software developers here at our company who it's the same situation. We bring in a new person who's being paid higher than someone who's been here for 10 years. And that this happens in all industries and all kinds of job categories. So in an ideal world, the scenario that your contact just described, where you bring in a new talent at the market rate and then slowly realize you've got to bring everybody else up, is the solution that I would recommend. In reality, people do not do this because they're trying to get somebody new in the door, and then the salary reviews, they'll be, oh, we'll do it later. And then usually there's budgetary issues where that precludes this. And by the way, oftentimes maybe the senior people don't know that the younger or the newbie is being paid higher than them, but this always kind of comes out. People talk about these things, right?
Absolutely.
So in an ideal world, you've got a comp department that is constantly on top of market data, that is refreshing market data every single year, so that if I find out that, oh, this person who's been here for 10 years, they're paid X amount lower than market, then here's a red flag for me. I'll correct this in the next cycle for merit increases. In an ideal world, that happens every year. And in organizations I've worked with in the past, we have done that every single year to mitigate the problem you just described. Now, most organizations, I'm just going to be blunt, don't do that. So it really kind of depends on the level of maturity in your talent organization, quite frankly. And I know that's a bleak scenario to say, but oftentimes we have to. This is why I think employee advocacy is really important, and we have to advocate for ourselves. And ask questions and raise your hand and say, how is my pay? Ask the straight question. How is my pay determined? And if they don't have a good answer to that, that's a red flag.
And that's being the CEO of You Incorporated. That's treating yourself as a business. This is not a charity. This is not, you're not doing this for your health. This is job description for money. Mm-hmm. And it should be transparent. How about that? So Jen, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bonnie. I just wanted to say, I randomly looked at the comments, and Avril said something that I think is really smart. So if you work at a publicly traded company, all publicly traded companies have to disclose their pay philosophy. So you can find their pay philosophy in their annual proxy filings. And I would highly recommend everyone, and any company is going to have this filing listed on their corporate website if you find the investor relations area. So I highly look, if you work for a company that's like that, take a look, and they should be able to articulate it for you. And if, by the way, you don't, oh, sorry, Bonnie, I was going to say, if, by the way, you don't work for a company that discloses that, you should still ask, because your company should have a compensation philosophy.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that are kept under wraps, like the idea that there's actually money for training. Why should that be a mystery? Why should that be a state secret that, like, oh, only certain people find out about that? There needs to be a movement towards transparency on all of these levels. It shouldn't be a big secret. In my view, that just adds, that eats up time and energy, and good energy that you could be being productive, as opposed to worried about your compensation and like, how come she gets to go to training and I don't? That's such a waste of time. Jen, can we have some comments here, ma'am? Here's a discrepancy between new hire and some of their. What if the person there for 10 years only has 10, 15 years experience, and the new person? Jeremy, you want to take this one?
Yeah. So let's see. Regardless of what you're saying, 10 to 15. Okay. Yeah. So someone bringing in 20 years of experience. So I do think that when people are bringing in roles, here's the interesting thing. Sometimes people are brought in for roles they're overqualified for. Or they're brought in. So for example, maybe I've got 20 years of experience, but maybe I'm applying for a role that really only requires 5 years of experience. So you got to think about the level for the role you're being brought in at. So sometimes your number of years of experience is not congruent with the job you're actually in.
Yep, I think that's true. Just keep in mind, in my view, job description equals money. It is about the responsibilities, the skills needed. It is that's what I'm seeing. And it's less about the college degree that you got 25 years ago and more about these training workshops, your certifications in office, et cetera, that are really making a difference in this workplace. What else do we have, Jen? The firm is updating job description. Oh, good. What should I be prepared to discuss? Who should I have this dialogue with?
My recommendation would be for everyone in your role, if you've got colleagues who are in the same role as you, get together and talk about what you think your ideal job description looks like. But based on your experience of actually doing the role, create it from scratch on your own. Don't look at what the company has. Use your own template and figure it out, and then present that with your managers and your HR business partners and ask for a review and ask them directly. We know you buy compensation surveys. What are we being matched to? What job description are you using to match this job description to? And they should be able to answer that. And if they can't, here's your avenue for making some change.
Right. And I'm seeing a trend. I'm hearing from assistants all over the country. The trend is towards adding a new employee to the HR team. And that person has a title that kind of goes like this: Director of Administrative Services, Director of Administration. That is a trend. I mean, some companies have had one of these people, but it's a person to wrangle all the different buckets and groups of assistants across the company. So it's not that a certain set of rules apply to this one in sales and marketing and another set of rules apply to the ones in legal. There's a consistency. There's a trend towards trying to organize the strata for these roles that are based in reality. In the article, we say how Department of Labor doesn't even have a C-suite executive assistant role. We all know that whole area exists and it needs to be paid accordingly. Jen, what else do we have, ma'am?
So we have a pretty lengthy one here from Angela that I think needs some airtime. She mentioned last Monday that was a horrible experience, given 2 days of very sporadic haphazard training, was not even trained on phones, given a doc to update with illegible markup. So I sat for 3 days trying to read my notes, asking for things to do. Monday I was told they don't need me, and I'm
on the edge of my seat, and
I don't see the and. I don't see the and. But the
so they let her go.
I don't see any more comments on that.
The lack of training is shocking. I can tell you at our Be the Ultimate Assistant workshops, of which we've done 45 of them in the last 9 years, I will ask as a group, who has a great onboarding program? And very few assistants raise their hand. Everybody remembers their first day. Everybody remembers, the way you enter a company. We have systems to hire people, but then what? It's shocking how, it's in my mom's day. My mom was a legal secretary. And I tell the story how when she, back in the day, the old time secretaries were just like, okay, there's your chair, there's your desk, there's your filing cabinet, there's your phone. See you in 20 years, and that was kind of the way it was. And assistants in 2020 are saying, Bonnie, it's the same way here. How does that serve a company, Jeremy? How does it serve a company to not offer any training or barely any?
I mean, great. I don't think it does. And quite frankly, that's the reason my company's in existence, is that we try to help companies do just that, offer training and do that stuff. So but I just have to say, I mean, honestly, I think sometimes it comes, having worked in HR my entire career, it's very oftentimes budget related, right? How much can we spend on something? And so oftentimes budgets, HR budgets are very, very meager. But I do think that what we're seeing happen around us in terms of societal changes in the last few years, particularly the last summer, has perked corporate America, quote unquote, up. So people are paying attention to things. These are diversity, equity, inclusion, pay equity being a big part of that, promoting and retaining women, making sure that women get access to leadership and succession development and types of training like this is, I hope, it feels like it's very kind of a hot topic right now. My hope is that it's not a flash in the pan, and that this becomes a sustainable kind of practice or ideology people bake into all of their talent management processes going forward. So if you are at a company right now that's not doing anything like that, or you're not seeing any inroads in the direction that you like, I think now is the chance we all have to kind of raise our hands and help shape that future direction.
That's awesome. And Jen, Angela just put the rest of the story, so we don't have to be waiting with I've also seen, the executive chief of staff is another term that's being used with director of administration. Sometimes it's interchangeable. So that's such an interesting point, Angela, that on Monday you were told that they don't need you, let you go. They invested the time and energy and the money to hire you, but not the time and energy to train you, to be a resource for them. So here's the thing. This is where I come to on this, is that nobody knows the role of an executive assistant better than an executive assistant. And the role has evolved and changed over the last 10 years for sure. And now everybody's working at home to some degree, and it's changed still again. And it's moving and it's shaping and it's morphing. I believe that as executive assistants are so smart and so resourceful, you could be a great resource for HR. Jeremy advised putting your own job description, do it yourself. It should be done already, but it's not. So let us take responsibility for creating it ourselves and offering our services to our leaders as a valuable resource for restructuring what needs to be restructured. And if you're psyched about creating a great onboarding system, I can tell you that I call them gaps. That's a huge gap in the global workplace, not only in the United States, that's for sure. What else is up there, Jen? Let me use that. They forget to make process. Oh. Take it upon yourself to do process procedures for the person who follows behind you. Jeremy, do you have any comments about that?
I mean, yeah, I've personally been in roles where someone's left me a lot of kind of, to-dos or guidebooks in the past, and I've always found that to be really helpful. I mean, that goes back to the old adage of leave a place better than you found it. I think that's a really good philosophy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, here's the thing, though. Right now in 2020, we're going to be, in the next few years, we're going to have a lot of baby boomers retiring, right? It's just a numbers game. But on top of all of that, like Brenda, thank you so much for that comment. I mean, there's such a case to be made for capturing all that tribal knowledge, all that institutional knowledge in a procedures manual, both hard copy and electronic, even video files, because it's not only the baby boomers who are going to be marching out the door soon, but what about COVID? What about this pandemic, which is such a wild card? We don't know. None of us on this call know right now if we ourselves are going to get sick tomorrow or whenever. We don't know if a member of our family or a loved one is going to get sick, to the point where we can't go in, is my point. Like, are we ready as companies for any one person to be plucked out suddenly? Are we ready for that? When I ask that question in classes, the answer comes back as a deer in the headlights. No way are we ready for that. And, if you watch the news, this pandemic could have a phase 2. We've got flu season, people are getting sick. Avril, what you got? We can also pull together KPI assessments during year-end reviews. This can help positively impact our comp. I happen to know you've done that. And, Avril, good for you. Any comments on that, Jeremy?
I mean, I think it's a really great idea. And the more data you can arm yourself with about your own performance, the better. So look at, come to your compensation conversations with your KPI assessments. Have ammunition with you to really put it in front of your manager and say, here's some data. And data-driven decision-making is the big rage right now, right? So provide as much data as you possibly can. Give them as much information around your own assessments. Come to the conversation with that job description. Come to the conversation with crowdsourced market data that you found.
Yep.
As much as you can, and say, hey, how is this, what I've found in my own, this different, maybe it differs from the reality here in this company. Let's talk about why that's the case.
Yeah. So I can't believe this hour has just flown. I kind of knew that was going to happen, though. What Jeremy and I urge is that you share this article. Jen, I think you're going to put the link in the chat. The article is all over LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. Jeremy and I are continuing to share it. Lucy Brazier of Executive Secretary Magazine, she's offering a 30% discount off a subscription to the magazine. Jen is putting up that promo code. Jeremy and I want to support everyone listening on this call and on the recording to have these conversations with HR and leaders. This is going to benefit the workplace as a whole. This is not only about increasing your salary for right this minute. This is about the next decade and beyond. I see it as, let us figure this out for ourselves, but then that will have impact for our children and our grandkids and the people coming up behind us. Do you have any closing remarks, Jeremy? What would you like to leave our audience with?
Well, I just, first of all, I'm just so grateful for the chance to be a part of this and talk with you, Bonnie, and to share this with your audience. So thank you very much for the opportunity and for working in your light, so to speak. Just wonderful to know you. Thank you again. And I would reiterate what you've said. I think we both are really passionate about pay equity. We're both are really passionate about people knowing the behind the scenes thing so that you can be a better advocate for yourself.
Yeah. So on my website, on bonnielowkramen.com, I have a blog. I'm a writer. I started out as a writer. So I have written articles called, 5 Ways for Women to Make More Money and Taboo No More. The effort here is to expose the reality of what's going on. And that lays out the strategy that Jeremy was just talking about, which is to put together a data-driven document to make your case. And I can promise you that assistants are getting it. When women understand the roadmap to asking for more money, it's very helpful to put it in writing first, because that document, that beautifully formatted document, which assistants totally know how to do, does the talking for you before you ever have to say, well, I believe this job description is really worth a $25,000 jump. That's a big mouthful to say for most people, but it's doable. And there's a lot of potential here. We have an opportunity, I think, in 2020, given the pandemic and given the volatility and the extreme changes that are going on in the workplace. Let us be allies to our leaders and HR and recruiters. Let us talk with them. It isn't them versus us. It really isn't, and it shouldn't be. We're going to get much more of what we want if we can come at it with collaboration, in my view. So, Jeremy, my fondest hope is that you and I will continue working and writing, and I'm beyond grateful that you were so honest and so knowledgeable and so willing to say the truth in this article that we wrote together.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. So Jen, come on back. Thank you so much for helping us behind the scenes. Jeremy, can people contact you?
Please, yes.
For information at Jeremy's company is Cornerstone, but csod.com, CSOD.com. And Jeremy, are you cool with letting people know how they can get you?
Yeah, absolutely. Please, my LinkedIn, I can be found on LinkedIn. So please reach out and connect with me there. And I'm happy to interact in any way possible. Yes, thank you.
All right. Oh, and I know Jen, you're going to help me finish up here that Be the Ultimate Assistant is now available on demand, and we're offering a promo code, B2AOD 250, in order to save $250 off the training. This is all about empowering assistants in every way to be an ultimate assistant. Jen, what else have I forgotten?
You got everything, and we'll be back next week at our regularly broadcasted time at 3 p.m.
At 3 o'clock Eastern time. I was speaking at the ELS forum this afternoon, so that pushed us. But Jeremy, very grateful to you. And everyone, I hope you got a lot out of this. Please share the recording and this information with HR and your leaders and recruiters and fellow assistants. Together we can change this. No one person is going to be able to do this alone, but together we really can. And I've seen it in practice. Assistants are doing this. You're really making some big things happen at companies, and I'm so proud of you. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. See you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Bye, thank you.